Welcome to another episode of the South by East podcast where we discuss scriptures, culture, and everything in between. Hey, on this episode, I remember it like it was yesterday, Brail.
Yeah.
I remember watching this press conference, and it's one of those clips that's iconic, man. You can remember it. It's Allen Iverson at the press conference saying, "We talking about practice," right? And I can remember being in class. I can remember being in certain environments and thinking the same thing. Like, man, as long as I can perform and stand up, perform when it's time to perform, then it shouldn't matter.
Right.
It shouldn't matter what I do the rest of the time, as long as I can do it.
Yeah.
Is that really the case?
Yeah, and I think the thing about this story that really struck me is that often the quotes of practice were always shared, but the story behind why he was saying that never really was. This ESPN clip that we're about to look at, and we'll link the full video, but it talks more about the backstory about why Iverson said that and why he was taking the stance that he was taking. Let's check it out real quick.
Yeah.
Repeatedly. AI had it on repeat.
You just talk about practice. We talking about practice. We talking about practice, man. What are we talking about? Practice?
It became a thing, a comical thing, a pop culture thing.
You're sitting in here, you're supposed to be the franchise player. And yet here we are, talking about you missing practice.
Practice? Practice?
Practice?
Not the game.
Not the game you go out there and die for. We talking about practice, man.
But it was more than a simple thing because, one, Iverson concluded that everyone in the room was questioning his heart, not just his work ethic, leadership, and commitment. And two, there was so much more going on below the surface.
I lost. I lost my best friend. I lost him, and I lost this year. Everything's going downhill for me, far as just that, far as my life.
Making the thing that was lost in all of this the loss of everything.
Man, when I watched this, and I'd heard some of this before, but I don't follow sports super close, but I remember practice. I remember that. When I watched this, he goes into talking about what had happened with Allen Iverson and how the day of that press conference, the person who had murdered one of Iverson's close friends was on trial. And he comes into this press conference after his boss had come in and said, "Man, we think we probably gonna trade you because of your practice habits." Which, and over this period of time where Iverson had been going through stuff, and it was reported Iverson even went to practice, he just sat out during practice. And so it was like, so this man came on TV and expressed, I lost my best friend. My life is blowing up. I'm the franchise player. Y'all aren't asking me about the game. Y'all are asking me about practice. And rather than talking about where Iverson was as a person, they made a mockery out of his statement. And it made me think about how a few things. One, we like to commodify dysfunction. Iverson's speech about practice sounds ridiculous out of context. Like, of course you need to be at practice. You are a leader on the team. Yes, you need to be there. And he said that in the conference. They don't usually clip that part, but he said it in the conference. Yes, you're a leader. Of course you need to be there on the team. So to think that you would disregard practice because you're a superstar, a black superstar, we gonna nail you to the wall. Second thing is, we value entertainment more than we value context. The story of a man who lost everything and was struggling mentally to be a part of where he had been leading and working before is a much more nuanced story than a superstar that doesn't care about practice. See, he's above everybody else. And so that's a much snappier story. And I believe that's why we ran with the story that we ran with. As a songwriter, I often have to frame my songs because I can't usually tell a full story in a song. And I had a song called That Line I was talking to with my wife the other day about, and she was like, because my songs are real personal to me, there's songs before my wife and I got married that she just doesn't like, because she's like, I know that's about somebody else. And I went to your shows, and so I heard you tell the stories, and she was like, man, you never told me who that song was about, because I was getting ready to possibly release it, and I was trying to see if I could get her blessing. And she was like, well, you never told me who it was about. We were on our way somewhere, and you wouldn't tell me who it was about, so I thought it must have been something bad. And I was like, no, the song ain't about anybody. She goes, what do you mean? I've heard you tell stories at shows and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, because when I'm in a big room, I have to frame every story. So I can't tell you everything, because I need you to understand one piece of what I'm saying. And if I told you everything, people could walk away with all sorts of stuff, could take stuff out of context. So I'm gonna frame this story. So I'm like, the story you've heard me tell is a part of the story, but the full story is, this was a writing exercise where I was imagining some things and I was trying to work some stuff out, but that doesn't really make sense in the course of a show. So I'm not gonna talk about that. I'm gonna tell you this version of the story, this part of the story. It's framed. I'm like, but if you want the full story, we can talk about the full story. It's not easy for me to explain when we're on our way somewhere, because the framed story is much easier to sell. And when I look back at this and I think about some of the work that we've done around mental health and stepping into spaces and getting to the work of context, as my therapist always says, I'm like, and in our community, when we tell the story, we frame the story to where people understand more of the context, but often the story that's told about people in our community, they don't want to work, they don't want to do X, Y, Z, is a story that's told without any context. And I was like, what happened to Iverson? A while ago. But the precedent that was set here, and like, man, we can make a lot of money by just selling a story with no context. We see all the time. We see Kanye West. We see Kanye in the what? Man, I'm gonna stop, but I'm just like, man, that hit my heart, bro.
Yeah, I would use some of those same words, and I would maybe use them this way. That story was able to happen because we commodify people, stories, and talent.
Speak on that.
Man, so there's this belief that if you have money, then you shouldn't have problems. And so I just look at that. You see Allen Iverson, and you think that because he made it big, because he made it to the NBA, man, all you gotta do is shut up and play. And there's this trope out there that says that all your problems are fixed because you got a check, and that's just not simply true. You still have grief. That's what he was suffering. He was suffering grief, and it even shows you how bad we were in terms of recognizing mental health issues at that time. Where when you have somebody who all of a sudden cares about nothing, that should be a magic sign that something has gone wrong, and they didn't recognize it. Because why? Because he was a commodity, and as long as he could put the ball in the hoop, then the reason why it became a pop culture moment, that somebody's breakdown became a pop culture moment, because we commodify stories. And so we want to sell that story, and so we want to clip it where it sells. We clip it where it sells. And so it wouldn't have sold as much as saying, man, this person was having a mental breakdown. And because now, if you try to sell somebody in the midst of a mental breakdown, you seem like the bad guy. And I don't want to seem like the bad guy. I want to seem like the profitable guy. And therefore, I got to clip it where it sells. And then talent, man, it's like one of those deals where sadly, and I would even take this to college athletics now. I would even take it to, man, it's happening at Little League, and even this. Here recently, they approved sports betting on political races. Here recently,
what?
they approved the ability to bet on political races. And bro, it has showed our ability to totally. So now you've turned this noble
Important civic duty.
and calling to say, I'm going to go represent and be a servant of the people. That's what a politician is supposed to be, a servant of the people that serves and sacrifices. I'm going to turn this into something I can bet on and profit off of based on who's the best at running campaigns. And man, because we commodify talent, right? Man, who's going to have the most people on Sunday in attendance? How many people can you say you preached to this last Sunday? We commodify charisma, and I mean, it's scary. It's scary. It's scary. And so people stop being people made in the image of God, and they start being trading cards.
Yep. And that filters all the way up, right? I was watching a clip the other day of Kamala Harris. She was cracking a joke about a political rally. It was crazy. That's probably going to be a whole other South by East episode. But so I'm not going to mention the exact clip. But in the end of it, she was like, "Oh no, you want the smaller rally up the street." And I was watching somebody breaking it down. They're like, "Man, they're always comparing rally sizes like her and Trump." And it's like, well, it's because we commodify charisma. It's important how many people. It's not as important what you're saying. It's important how many people have come out to hear you say it, and it causes. When you're in the game, you got to play the game. You got to play to win. So I'm gonna clip the story of my song because I know that this story will sell. So I'm gonna clip that. Kanye West at one point in time was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he was talking about at that time he had owned the narrative. He spins a different narrative now. At that time he had owned the narrative that he had bipolar disorder, that he had medication, and he was like, "But I don't take my medication." I was like, "Why?" He was like, "Because it makes me less creative and less interesting." He would rather be manic, bipolar, out of control, but in the spotlight, than he would be in control of his emotions and able to focus and be in his healthiest way. Because he knows the healthier I get, the less money I'm actually going to make. And so it's not just, sometimes we want to put the onus on the person, like we want to put the onus on the Allen Iverson, we want to put the onus on the Donald Trump or the Kamala Harris. We and what we're interested in, and we talk about this a lot on this podcast, drives how the game is played. And when we talk about people not getting help for mental health, and we talk about part of that is because of the way that we commodify stories.
Man, and so we got to look at that, bro. It is so important with how we look at that and how we take these things to heart, how we walk beside people, how we value them, and say, hey, I know that I could do it this way and it could sell more, but that can't be my end goal. I got to do this in a way that dignifies the individual who's made in the image of God.
Yeah, for sure. Man, what do y'all think, though? How are you feeling about this? What adjustments have you thought about, or what stories does this bring to mind in your life? We'd love to hear about it in the comment section. Continue to comment, like, subscribe. Thank you guys for all of your support, and we will see you next week in the intersection.